It is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on D20 Modern, the modern take on the third edition of Dungeons & Dragons. Well, where we left off, we've been talking about, of course, being a game master in D20 Modern. Let's go over some more important details. Let's talk about the resources that your characters accumulate. Alright, so the course of adventures, your characters are of course going to accumulate resources. This can lead you in a number of paths which you have to watch out for. The first path that could occur because of the resources they could accumulate is they could start jumping to conclusions about the process of the adventure. Now, this could mean they're going off in a totally different tangent, which isn't a problem. You're continuing to build the adventure into what you need, accumulating the resources and experience they need to reach the end. But a bit of those resources they might receive might give them a clue that they're going to actually figure out where to go right away. And unfortunately, if you've already planned some things out from your adventure, it could drive your characters into a point in time where they're facing against a villain earlier on, facing against a head challenge much sooner than you were anticipating. The thing is, you should plan for some of this accordingly. You should treat your villains like they know what they're thinking about. The thing is, you don't want to deny your heroes whatever you want them to do. You want them to feel like they're still remaining on the path, that they haven't just, skipped over things and you're, just putting a roadblock in their way. So something like a smart villain might, of course, account for someone attempting to break into their thing and plan for it. There might be a villain that's resourceful and plans ahead, putting together contingency plans. So if the heroes should arrive, they can go off and continue working on their plan somewhere else. An aggressive one might send goons to interfere, which maybe the advent of those goons could have something that would lead their characters in a different direction. So you can see, you can do things to prevent your characters from jumping to those conclusions with the resources they gain from parts of the adventures and encounters you have on them, and keep them on a path that allows them to gain the necessary experience and resources in order to eventually reach that climactic point that you want them to be at when fighting and defeating your villain of the story. It's also important to note, in a lot of action adventure stories, characters rely on their own skills and knowledges oftentimes in order to accomplish the various tasks. Your players, on the other hand, might begin to rely on their resources and contacts more than, of course, themselves. They should be ready to use themselves, but they're putting this reliance on what they have. You can actually stop this in a couple of ways. For one thing, if you really wanted to, if they were very reliant on a lot of extra resources you have them be robbed. They could be robbed by just someone innocuous that's going to kind of throw a wrench in their things, or it could be the villain arranges for a bunch of their stuff to be taken. You could also do something like frame the heroes for some kind of crime. Now, granted, maybe they aren't getting sent to jail right away, but it might put a damper in their reputations and wherever they are. It might prevent you from using contacts that might help them out along the way. These little details that you add in like this make it that you can balance the amount of resources that your characters have and keep them in check, both on the lower side and the higher side, because it's important to manage your characters with their basically toys that they have. They're going to want a lot of them. It's just a matter of making sure you're using them wisely. Now let's talk about location, because every encounter that you're going to have should have some kind of memorable location matching behind it, for the details of the location are going to add to the adventure just as much as the actual encounter is at said location. Details in these places can help shape how an adventure ends up. Things like crowds that might be in an area mean that maybe your heroes have to worry about bystanders getting in the way of a battle between two forces. If you're in an area of machinery, they might not be able to hear the enemy sneaking up on them. Also, they might have to worry about if they fall into that machinery and getting hurt by it. So you can see there are details that you add in to make these places memorable, just as memorable as the characters and the battle itself. You want to make sure these locations have as much drama and inspiration as anything else that you're throwing together here. You want to make sure that when you put everything out and describe it, your characters are already coming up with interesting ideas as to use the environment to its maximum ability. That's why location is very important here. Now let's talk about rewards your characters might be getting. Rewards are actually something very powerful that you're going to be using in your game. The first thing you have to think about rewards, because rewards take many forms. Beyond just resources or money or EXP, there could be reputation, various other things that are functionality rewards. The first thing a reward might do is it might encourage terrible behavior in your players. Now, there are going to be a bunch of different encounter types, which I will talk about, but if your characters are always going to turn to violence first when it comes to battling against an enemy, and you're going to encourage this by repeatedly granting them a reward and basically not thinking about it, you're encouraging to continue this process, that they're going to solve every one of their problems with shooting it first, asking questions later. And maybe that's not the most optimal way for them to have fun, or for the entire basic encounter to build the way that you actually want it to make it exciting. So the fact is, you're going to have to manage the reward versus how they act too. Maybe if they shoot these guys, they don't get as much as they would have if they would have talked them out with it. The fact is that you should build the different encounters, that they seem to have different rewards to them that reflect those. You're going to want to make sure that when they make a decision how an encounter actually ends up going, whether it's fighting or talking, which are two major ones that are going to happen, that they have an idea of what the rewards of each of these are going to be. If goons are just coming after them, then yeah, you're going to beat them up. But if they're going into this place where they're trying to find out information, maybe beating these guys up for information isn't going to get them as much as negotiating with them. And they should be aware of these sort of things. Once they are encouraged towards the behavior that you're wanting. You're also going to want to use rewards to encourage players to be bold. Effectively, the bolder your characters are, the quicker your game is going to go. The more cautious they are, the slower it's going to go. So the fact is that you're going to use rewards to sort of balance out these two also. That you probably don't want it too quick, but you don't want them to be too slow. Because neither of these are they savoring and gaining the most out of the encounters and the adventure you're building. You want to set it up that they are getting the most excitement out of it, and therefore sort of getting in that middle zone. It's also important that you do different types of encounters. Because just planning out a single type of encounters, constant combat encounters, is of course going to drive them more into combat focus. And oftentimes, maybe, again, they might just go for, they're going to expect combat, and maybe start planning for out there. So you see how it's a cycle that you're going to encourage the worst parts of the behavior just because you aren't putting out this different effort. So you actually have to almost think about using the different types of encounters, which there are a number of types of encounters that you could use. We've talked about a few of them, but there are, of course, combat encounters, which they take two forms, actually. Offense or defense. Offense means your characters are going someplace and they know they're going to be picking a fight with whoever they get there. While defense means they know someone's coming into the area they're at and they have to protect it against these invaders. On the other hand, of course, you have those negotiation encounters where they have to use their words, either to convince another player or possibly the GM that whatever they want to get done is a good idea. So effectively, they're using their words for the best of their ability to convince things. You could have an environmental encounter. This is something like fire, flood, earthquake, storms, hurricanes, tornadoes. It's something going on in the environment where it itself is a challenge to the players. And it's not really something you can beat because it's nature, because it's the environment. You still have to overcome it, but it's more surviving, mitigating the terrible factors of it, rather than beating it. Problem solving is effectively using logic or knowledge to overcome some kind of mystery or puzzle. As simple as that. Judgment calls effectively, it's the opposite kind of. It's rather than using that logic that you have, it's using your gut instincts to make a snap decision which can have a huge effect on the overall thing. But it's probably not going to be a huge encounter, a judgment call one, but probably a very critical one to the overall outcome of your adventures. And finally, investigations, which are actually more of a long-term encounter, because rather than, making a single logical call and trying to solve a mystery, it's a series of learning information and overcoming it and solving problems in order to find a successful end to an investigation. So it functions over more time rather than much of the short term, which the problem-solving kind of end is on. So that's it for today. I, of course, finished up with the last tip I wanted to talk about. Resources for your characters. So I went over, of course, the fact that resources are something you're going to have to manage correctly, because it can, of course, if you're not rewarding it in the right way, it could also lead your characters down to early paths for the villains, which you could always adapt, or it could cause them to rely on their resources too much. And then you, of course, have to figure out a way to mitigate that factor so they're not relying on it. Of course, then talk about the location you're going to be putting your adventures on, because as they say in the movie series, it's location, location, location. So is it in a role-playing game. Location can be so important to the encounters you make. If your encounters are in somewhere that's just like bland, it's no fun at all. Then, of course, I did talk about encounters a little bit more with the rewards you're going to have for them, and that managing your rewards can actually manage your player's behavior. If you reward them in a certain way, repeatedly, often, it's going to encourage a behavior, which not necessarily is a bad behavior, but could end up being a bad behavior. And having a variety of encounters, which I talked about the encounter types, can also help out here. It can help that they don't have an expected type of outcome with the rewards connected to that whatever rewards you're giving are going to be from all these different types of encounters, and they're not going to just settle into a behavior which you don't want them to settle into. Because you don't know that you don't want them to do that until they start settling. So get on top of that before it's a problem. In the next episode, talk a little bit about structures of encounters, purchase DCs for items, and move into talking about experience. But if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It's just for the channel, the Empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you could always check out my Patreon, link description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.